Thank you, everyone, for joining. I'm pleased to introduce our guest today, Ryan Williams. He's the author, keynote speaker, and former stand-up comedian. So ask him some questions. He's a funny guy and apparently a good writer. He authored his book, The Influencer Economy, which is a top seller on Amazon. And he teaches readers how to launch their stories, collaborate with influencers, and thrive in the digital age. Ryan's work has been featured in Inc. magazine, Huffington Post, The Observer, Business Insider, and USA Today. He also has a podcast called The Influencer Economy, which he can talk about as well. And then he was also on the early social media team at Digicend, which was acquired by Disney, and Machinima, acquired for Warner Brothers. So thank you, Ryan, for being here. And he's also pretty good at basketball. And you can see him shooting hoops over at Venice High School Gym on Wednesday nights. So with that, thank you, Ryan, for joining.
Thank you, Dave. Hey, everyone. How's it going today? Just to give you some background here, Dave has a really good reverse layup under the hoop at the Venice High Gym every Wednesdays, which you can feel free to come watch us. We never have anyone in the audience, so it would be a complete shock. And as Dave mentioned, I'm a former stand-up comedian, so I wanted to ask you to give yourselves a round of applause for being out today. You could be anywhere. You watching at home, thank you for tuning in. And it's a little known fact, when you do stand-up comedy, you may notice that when a performer goes on stage and you're in the crowd, the comedian always says, "Give it up for the last performer." And side note, you always want to start off with applause, because then if you bomb, at the very least, you felt good for 5 seconds when you started your talk. So I wrote the book, The Influencer Economy, How to Launch Your Idea, Share It with the World, and Thrive in the Digital Age. So as I have been researching influence over the last few years, I've understood that true influence comes through collaboration. And on the two ends of the spectrum, when you want to think about influence, there's being alone, building in a garage, in a silo, in your office, and collaboration, working with others. And the more you collaborate, or as they say in the YouTube world, collab, then that's where the influence happens. So today we'll be talking about this on many levels, and I'd love to get started if you all are ready. Grumpy Cat. Who here is not familiar with Grumpy Cat? So everyone here is aware of Grumpy Cat, right? Grumpy Cat's a meme. Grumpy Cat looks like a grumpy person and was started on a Reddit thread many years ago. This was the original photo of Grumpy Cat. And then it became a large-scale meme. I went to South by Southwest a couple years ago. There was a line of 75 people to take selfies with Grumpy Cat. Grumpy Cat, little known fact, gets over $10,000 for appearance fees. Another little known fact, Grumpy Cat has a manager. There is a meme manager out there that has Grumpy Cat under its umbrella. And Grumpy Cat looks authentic, right? And authenticity pays in the digital economy. So today I'd love to talk to you about how to tell your stories, how to tell your badass stories. At the end of the talk, the last few slides, I'll be giving you a framework for how do you tell your badass stories. So feel free, if you're watching at home, get a pen and paper, as well as in the crowd here at Google, because I'll be giving you an actual framework for telling badass stories to help you get a promotion, to help you generate sales leads, and to help you to launch your business idea. When talking about storytelling, I realized through my podcast, I've collected over 100 interviews with some of the top best-selling authors, globally renowned YouTubers, and amazing podcasters. And I found that everyone needs 3 stories in their pocket at all times. And most of us, the majority of us, nearly all of us, undervalue our stories. We let the boss tell our story to their superior and then wonder why we didn't get that raise. We think that our sales rep understands the story to close the deal, but little do you know that you've got no revenues because the sales rep couldn't pitch the business. Or even worse, you think your significant other gets you, and you're surprised when they're not in your brain to understand what you're thinking when you're mad. So the 3 stories that I'll talk about today that everyone needs in their pocket are what I call your underdog story, your badass authority story, and your fixer story. The first story is the underdog. Think about Rudy. Think about walking on to Notre Dame. Think about having no background in football, and suddenly you're on the field. The underdog story is when you're an outsider and you become an insider. It's when you have an outsider perspective, you're an underdog, and you succeed. David and Goliath is a great example of this. And all of us, when I worked for startups like Machinima and Digison that were acquired by Warner Brothers and Disney, all of our founders had such great stories about being the disruptor. Google itself, you acquire many companies, and those startups often have that outsider story. They're raging against the machine, if you will. And Brené Brown is my example for the badass authority story. Google Talks, TED Talks, we all know people come in to teach you something. And a true word-of-mouth marketing pro will leave you with 3 things to remember, because things in our brain process through 3. For example, I have 3 badass stories. That's for a reason, because we process that way. And a badass story, whether it's a TED Talk or a Google Talk, happens in a way where we are showing our authority by teaching and instructing and giving people something to remember. They can tell their spouse, their client to refer you for business, their co-founder. And that's where true authority comes from, through instructing others. And then finally, we have Winston Wolfe from Pulp Fiction, and he's the fixer. He helps do all the dirty work. And your fixer story is when you talk about solving problems for other people. And that's how, when you become a badass, you don't mention 6 figures and how much money you make. A side note, I went to a dinner the other week, and one of the guys next to me, it's always a guy, right? He says, I said, what do you do? And he says, I make 6 figures. And I wanted to just walk away immediately and drop my fork and spill my beer on him. But then I made the mistake of asking a follow-up, and I said, how do you do that? He said, no joke, I make 6 figures helping business people who make 6 figures make 7 figures. And I was just like, oh my God, this is the worst type of person I want to be around at a networking event. So that's not what a fixer is. A fixer is someone who solves problems. A fixer is someone who actually tells you who the customer is. It's often like Mad Libs. I help people do blank. I help people tell stories. I help people learn how to use Google AdSense. I help people watching at home to share videos on Facebook, which I hope you do with this video. So everyone needs 3 badass stories in their pocket, anytime, anywhere. I'm going to show you how to do this later. But in the meantime, let's have an interactive part of the talk. This is my family growing up circa 1992 in the blistering cold winter of Des Moines, Iowa. Now, just to have a second here to pause, is my family photo that went out to all of our friends that my mom posed in our driveway, see her wreath in the back? She's very proud of that. Is this authentic? Do you think it's authentic? You don't think it's a hater in the front row. I love these people. I love when you get someone who just says no right away, and then you're like, all right. So it's not authentic. Why? It's set up, right? What do you think? The expressions on the faces are authentic. So you're not saying no, but you're not saying yes.
Yeah, I think even if it's staged, you can't get kids to do exactly what you want them to do. So there's some element of authenticity in it.
There's some element of authenticity to it. Okay. And do you know which one is me? People sometimes get confused. Middle. Bottom left, no. Middle, yes. The bottom left is my younger brother who looks like he took a hockey puck to the face. He has no teeth. So is this authentic? Again, please feel free to. I'll come up to the front of the stage. Yes?
I think so.
You think so? Why is that?
Because it's got that kind of lighthearted, warm feeling that you get when something kind of candid happens, and candid is very authentic, right? It's like the expression of the moment as it happened. Whether this was staged by your mom or not, it was kind of like an authentic happening in that time.
So it's candid. It's in the moment. It's staged by my mom. I have an authentic face. I'm an awkward middle child still. And at that moment, I was not self-aware of who I was. So my older brother had just cracked a joke because the photographer, Virginia, had backed up and stepped in dog poop. And my brother made a joke about it, but he's a cool teenager. So he knows that he's got to have his game face on. But I feel like I could be the most authentic person here because I'm laughing at the joke. But anyone else on this side of the room, is this authentic? And what do you think?
I think so.
Always, always. And you could see our breath, it's so cold outside. So when we all got pneumonia afterwards, thanks, Mom.
It's authentic to me because it reminds me of my own family photos that my mom would have taken growing up. So my own point of view, it looks authentic.
It looks authentic because she can relate to it because her family tortured her through pleated khaki pants, matching red sweaters, and turtlenecks in the blistering cold of Iowa. And anyone watching from home on YouTube, please leave a comment, and I will interact with everyone in the comments to tell me if my family was authentic. Because I think everyone here was right, in a way. It's framed, which seems inauthentic, but our expressions are authentic. And meanwhile, I just kicked my younger brother in the shins, and he had punched me in the stomach, and that's authentic. You can't manufacture that type of brotherly authenticity around the world. So again, please leave a comment in YouTube if you're watching this, because what I call this is being inauthentically authentic. And as storytellers, we all need to think about how to be real when telling our same story again and again and again. Who here works in sales? How many times a day do you pitch the same story? A week, a month, and you rehearse that story. And we all need to consider ourselves that we work in sales and we're selling ourselves. Because storytelling can help you reinvent your career, can help you get that promotion, and it can help you launch your idea. And it's not about the elevator pitch. We're not here to talk into a confined elevator where I get 20 seconds to pitch you. I hate getting pitched. Coming back to South by Southwest where I went, I used to go every year, people pitch you all the time, and it's like clammy hand central, people talking to you, they give you business cards, you throw a third of them away. And ultimately, people don't know how to network in a lot of ways because they think they need to pitch you, and they're only going to get 30 seconds. And if you can't get a conversation going with someone, it's not worth telling a story. I recommend that you consider that when someone wants to hear your story, you're collaborating, and you want them to opt in to your story. You want them to reciprocate, and you're not pitching them. It's not a one-way street because stories are connecting. And I recommend everyone have a 20-minute conversational story. And that's really, I interviewed a lot of Hollywood screenwriters and Oscar-nominated directors and people that are working in entertainment that pitch studios, and they said a 20-minute conversational story is the threshold where you can actually make a difference in Hollywood to get someone's attention to get that next meeting or opportunity. And when you think about your storytelling, you need to put yourself in the other person's shoes. My dad gave me great advice when I was interviewing for jobs after college. And he says, when you're in the interview, don't let them ask questions to you. You need to ask questions to them. What's in it for them? Everyone has a massive ego, and people love to talk about themselves. So if you can hear their stories, how many times have you walked away from a job interview where you've said, that person says, I really liked you, and all you did was listen to them the whole time. And all they did was talk about how great they were. And all you did was silently nod or say, I want to hear more, or say thank you for sharing that. Because ultimately, storytelling works both ways. And when you're in the right room at the right time, you need to tell different stories. And you can't rely on the same stories over again because people want to hear different elements of your life and your story and your work at the right time. So this is my story right now. It's funny because I got laid off from a big corporation, Disney, and there's no photos on Facebook of me depressed at work getting laid off. Like, you don't capture that. So I did a little freelancing with my Photoshop skills, and that's the parking lot where I cried after getting laid off from Disney. And I was ashamed with my box of belongings in my car, not wanting to call my wife for fear of what she'd say. And I ended up going to a Burbank taqueria and drinking a margarita with another guy who was laid off. Ultimately, I got a better job 2 weeks later. I started at machinima.com, which is a big YouTube partner. And who here, just out of curiosity, has been fired or laid off? Who here is not telling the truth? Who here just has had the same job at Google for their whole life? One person. Okay, 2 people. And if you're watching on YouTube, in the comments, tell me if you've been laid off or fired and where you've been laid off or fired. because ultimately we're all going to be rejected in our life. We're all going to go through reinvention. And for that moment in the parking lot when I cried, there's nothing better than getting laid off, getting severance, and then finding a new job, getting a raise, and double dipping, right? For those of you that have been laid off, when you double dip, you feel like a pro. You're like, I worked the system. I totally had this moment where I failed, but then I succeeded. And storytelling, when we're badasses and we're trying to frame these moments that were authentic, that failure really can become a positive. And so most of us undervalue our stories. The majority of people, they truly undervalue their stories because they're worried about taking credit, perhaps, or they don't want to be braggadocious, or they don't want to be inauthentic and seem like they're cheesy or too salesy. And oftentimes, these low moments in our life, these underdog moments when you rise up, are truly badass moments. So when you have your badass story, and consider this as an exercise with your customers, with your network, or with your peers at Google. But you need to think about your story audience. And I don't recommend you think about reaching everyone with your stories. I highly suggest you think about 11% of your customer base, your network, or your community. And I'll tell you in a minute why. But for starters, you have to think about your collaborators. Your collaborators are 10% of your network. This is based initially and inspired by an early 2000 study about what made Wikipedia work. And Wikipedia, we all use it to this day, is actually only written by 1% of internet users. And 10% of the community edits Wikipedia. And 89% of us are lurkers. So in this room, all of us are lurkers. And when you think about telling your story, presenting yourself to the world, talking about your business, the collaborators, these are the people that I call your bar regulars. They're your network. They're your weak ties that you maybe met through an acquaintance that can help you open doors for new channels. And they're the people that organize a happy hour. You come, you bring Dave, he brings 3 friends, he brings his team from Google, and then you spread your word of mouth that way. Whenever you're looking for a job, what's the first thing you do? When I got laid off by Disney, I hit up Machinima, who was a client of mine, and I asked them if they had openings. And it's funny, right, when you get laid off, you have to frame your story. Like, how do I say that I'm in between opportunities without saying that they told me to go away? And those collaborators are the people that prove your concept out. And then they're the influencers. And I'm not talking about Instagrammers that get a bunch of likes, these no-talent zeros that look sexy in blue jeans. I'm not talking about these 1%ers on YouTube. I'm talking about the people that can make change and that are game changers for you because they're able to open doors, generate leads for your business, make the right connections for you to further enhance your career. And you need to think about 11% of the community. Who here watches YouTube videos with professional YouTubers? You subscribe to channels. You watch the content. They put it out consistently. So the YouTube phenomenon about collaboration, it's called collabing. Anyone here familiar with that word? I imagine people watching on YouTube are. So collabing is when you share your story on another YouTuber's channel, and then they come on your channel to collab and share their story. So who here has a hobby that they would be willing to pretend like they had a YouTube channel about? You right there. Do you have a hobby that we could talk about? 0 hobbies. And you work at Google?
Yeah, very boring.
Wow. Yeah.
I'm an illustrator and a painter.
So let's say you have an illustration channel. What's your name?
Alex.
So Alex has Alex's Paint Guru YouTube channel. 100,000 subscribers, right? Anyone here into art as well? What's your name? Kari. What kind of art? What kind of art? Graffiti art. Oh, yeah, that's great. Can you talk to the guy next to you to give him some hobbies? That's a really cool hobby. So we have a YouTube channel here with 1 million subscribers, right? So Alex's graffiti channel. And you all are going to collab, which means you're going to go on each other's channels. Even though your channel over here has 100,000, right? That's okay. It's a very focused community. It's niche. And even though your graffiti channel is very broad, it doesn't matter. The majority of YouTubers are givers. They want to open up doors and channels. And they want to lend their influence to others. And true collaboration happens when you're able to tell your stories to other folks that then can share your story to their networks. And as I mentioned before, you want to opt in with your stories. You don't want to spam people like you're posting frictionless information on Facebook. If you can tell me a great Facebook conversation you have where you change someone's mind, I'll give you $100 on the spot. But when you want to collaborate with people, you opt in. So the collab happens where you make a video let's say 3 minutes long. You make a video 3 minutes long. You're in each other's videos. They're separate videos. They go to those separate audiences. And then you drive subscribers and likes and community to one another. The million subscribed graffiti channel, you're opening up to a broad audience with this 100,000 subscribed channel over here, but you're getting more of a niche audience with this art channel. And that's really how the internet works and how you surface yourself above the fray with your Amazon book, your YouTube channel, your Instagram page. It's collabing. So metaphorically speaking, think about that with your network. There's a great book I recommend called Give and Take by Adam Grant. And he was kind enough to leave a blurb on the back of my book. He talks about givers and takers and matchers. And anyone familiar with this book? It's a great book, and I recommend reading it after you read my book. And we can start a book club if you'd like. You know, Ryan at influencereconomy.com if you'd like to join the book club. And it'll be global. Ultimately, there's givers, takers, and matchers. Most of us are matchers, right? You help me, I help you, survival. Scratch my back, I'll scratch your back. And then there's the takers, which we all have to work with, which I think this guy over here may be a taker because he was very judgmental about my family being inauthentic. Sorry, not sorry. And so takers you have to work with, right? And givers. So givers are people that succeed the most and they fail the most. Giving with purpose is how you succeed. Giving with your own self-interest aligned is how you succeed. And that's where Adam's research really comes into play. So think about that with your 10% collaborators. So this is a globally renowned TV host. And you may not recognize Oprah. This is back when her show was only in Chicago and not nationally syndicated. And she's wearing extremely tight, skinny jeans. And what I think about authenticity is it's when your actions match your words. On my podcast, I've talked to some legendary authors and YouTubers and people with a lot of influence, and I always ask them, what is your definition of authenticity? And what I surmised is your actions match your words. And why Oprah's important here is she skinnied herself down. She lost 60-some pounds to fit into these blue jeans. She actually now regrets this episode because she didn't want to define her self-worth through whether or not she could fit in blue jeans. But ultimately, she brought out a bunch of fat and gristle from a steak to show in a Ziploc bag all of the weight she lost. What happened in that moment was Oprah allowed people into her story. And true authenticity, the ability to tell your badass story, the ability to grow yourself and your work comes from letting people in to your story, giving them behind the curtain. If you make a mistake, it's okay, because don't worry about it. We're all imperfect. The second thing about Oprah that I love is she thought about her story audience. And she had an avatar, a character in her mind that she had as a Midwest housewife, Susie. So she said, what's in it for Susie? What will Susie get out of the show? What will Susie take away from this episode? And every episode she did was for Susie. So think about when you're telling your story, you're in a sales pitch at Google, working in, trying to get a new client. Who's your Susie? Put yourself in their shoes, and what story can you collaborate on to share with them? And finally, true collabing happens when you work with others to share platforms and opportunities and connections. She really took off to superstardom when Meryl Streep, the Bushes, the Obamas, Tom Hanks, all these A-list celebrities came on her show, right? And they became able to grow their platform and hers. She really collaborated with influencers. So if you think about this in context of your work, try to find the Oprah of your business. None of us will be the Oprah of our business necessarily, but find those influencers to present our story to that really can move the needle like she does for other people. So these are your 3 badass stories, and the underdog, the badass, and the fixer. So a story, that connects you to an emotional level is the underdog, specifically when you overcame an obstacle. The badass displays your expertise in your specific field that you can teach others about. And finally, the fixer, it shares a problem you're solving with a current customer, or it presents your business thesis or vision. The underdog story. I want to tell you about your badass story as an underdog. Rocky, Philadelphia. Anyone here from Philadelphia? Back there, right? Champion of the underdog. Eagles just won the Super Bowl, ultimate underdog story. Rocky and Sylvester Stallone, little known fact, he packaged the deal he wrote the screenplay for Rocky. Did y'all know this? And he said, I'm only going to do it if I act in it. And he turned down money and other roles and opportunities because he wanted to act. And so he was an underdog himself. But the underdog story is when you're the outsider to pitch yourself, present yourself, and you succeeded in the end, or you thrived because you created that opportunity like an underdog. I used to call this story your tearjerker, but it got a little too emotional for people because not everyone wants to talk about emotional moments. Because little known fact, I was a stand-up comedy performer and simultaneously going through clinical depression. And I would let you be the judge if I was funny or not as a depressed stand-up comedian. But that is really where I overcame my obstacle. I call it my jumping out of an airplane moment. I was able to put myself out there and feel the response from the audience, and it really helped me reframe my life to position myself more in marketing, realizing that who here likes Public Enemy? There's Chuck D and there's Flava Flav. And what I realize is sometimes you're the lyricist like Chuck D, and sometimes you're the hype man like Flava Flav. And we all go back and forth, hype man to lyricist, to Flava Flav. So think about that as you collaborate and reach your moments of sharing your underdog story. And the badass story, that is what this stage is for. Every Google Talk, every TED Talk, it's a badass story. I've studied hundreds of them. What I realized was many of them start with a tearjerker and then roll into the badass authority. Like, oh, I'm an introvert. Let me tell you how I'm introverted, and let's tell you the secret of introverts. Let me tell you how I asked people for money begging on the street, and now here I am talking about asking for things and how you can do it for yourself. So the crux of this story is Brené Brown. Anyone familiar with her work? She talks a lot about authenticity, and she's a shame expert. And she talks about how shame's on this spectrum and authenticity's on the other spectrum. How's everyone doing, by the way? How are we doing at home? If you are paying attention on YouTube, like this video. Then they'll let me know if there's 1,000 likes. But Brené Brown, she talks about shame and authenticity and how we're all built to not talk about shame. And so her TED Talk and her Google Talks, many books she's written, are all about those topics. And she's an expert in it. She's done years of research. So she teaches you something. Hopefully today you could take away one thing or three things with your badass stories to bring to your teams, your spouse, your significant others. And Celeste Heatley has given a Google Talk as well and many TED Talks. She talks about how to have better conversations. She's in the red dress up there. I interviewed her on my podcast, was a remarkable guest. I find the best podcast guests are fellow podcasters or authors because they know how to frame a story. And the worst are tech founders. No offense, I don't want to hear about going to Stanford and building a company in your garage or how it's like raising venture capital or what your product does because unfortunately that doesn't relate to 99% of the country. And Celeste Heatley talks about, sorry to bash tech founders in the room, but Celeste Heatley, she says there's three ways to tell stories and converse. And they come across through body language, through vocabulary, and through physical language. And so email is really inefficient because I only get your vocabulary. And picking up the phone is much better. Who here works in sales and knows to close, you call because you get the tone. And finally, body language. That's why we want to meet people in person. And the fixer story. Olivia Pope, the ultimate fixer. Winston Wolfe from Pulp Fiction, the ultimate fixer. Who here watches Scandal or has seen Pulp Fiction? Say the majority of the room in America is most likely. So the fixer is how am I solving problems for people, and not how much money I make, not six figures, guy or gal, and definitely not like what your client base is. That can help sometimes for some social proof, but you want to say I help people do blank. Like think about the context of what you do based on how you help others. So Dave, how would you frame your work based on I help people do blank?
I help companies better understand what's going on the website so that they can sell more product to users that find it valuable and helpful.
So Dave helps people understand their website, and he's making you more money in the long run, right? And then Dave, I'll write you a check right now. That was a great sales pitch. So when you think about your context of how you help others, it's often based on, like, I'm providing value, and I'm not going to give you a dollar amount, or I'm not going to show you. You all know these YouTubers that talk about in their garage and their Ferraris. You know, they talk about how rich they are. The whole self-help business world's all about, oh, I got laid off from my job, and my girlfriend broke up with me, and then I made a bunch of money on LinkedIn. Right? Those are not true badass stories. If you tell me that you have to make money, then you're not a badass. Sorry. So think about also the truth in what you do. We're going to go a couple more slides here, and then we'll get into the framework for how to tell the badass stories. So find the truth in what you do. Who here has studied improvisation? We're based in LA. There's a lot of comedy here. And there's, Del Close is a great improviser based out of Second City, which many Saturday Night Live castmates have come from. And they talk about the truth in what you do when you're doing improv. True humor as a storyteller isn't when you have punchlines. How many of you told a story where you thought it was really funny and no one laughed? And then you're like, oh, that's really, yeah, I'm going to leave the room right now. Exit stage left because you didn't laugh. True humor comes out of stories when you have a funny story and you have moments where people could laugh. And if they don't laugh, then you move on with yourself. So we all have great stories, and you want to bring people in, introduce conflict, let them often, figure out the final answers. Using myself as a guinea pig, I mentioned I did stand-up comedy while I was depressed, and I let you be the judge if I was funny or not. Half the room probably thought I was a typical comedian. Other half probably thought I was a walking zombie. But you don't have to solve the conflicts. And always be aware of how awesome you are, how much of a badass you are, and think about the word choice. And this is my father-in-law. Who here is married and has an in-law and knows how complicated those types of relationships are, right? So my father-in-law is a boiler repair company in North Carolina. I live in California. And he wants to know what the influencer economy is and what machinima is and what YouTube videos do and how these startups that have so much value don't make any money. These are obvious questions that we should answer. But with him, I asked him, what is your secret as a boiler repair operator and owner in Raleigh, North Carolina? He says, you got to solve pain points. So when you think about your storytelling to pitch your business, yourself, or your work, what is the pain point your story is solving? How boring are you if you're listening to someone talk or you're on the receiving end of a story with no point, right? So what are you solving for that person? Do they want to laugh? Do they want to hear you so they can help you and tell their friends that you need a new job? Do they want to become someone who's buying your product and increase your sales? And he says that he was very good at developing a knowledge or skill that he could tell people just enough about to fix their boiler, but not enough that they could do it on their own. Right? That's, yeah, Joe Moore over there, father-in-law. Father-in-law of the year, if you're watching, Joe. And so he talked about how the boilers are people, an industry where they think they can do it themselves. Like how many of you all have clients in sales that they think they can not hire you, and then you give them a little information, a free consultation, and a phone call, and then they call you up a week later, oh my God, I need you to optimize my website. Like I totally want to make more money, and I dropped the ball, we're now losing money. So he talks about, you got to develop this knowledge or skill and then share it with people, why all these principles through collaboration and influence are available online and offline for all of us. This isn't just an online marketing program. And empathy, right? Over the last year, many CEOs and executives at large corporations have talked about the need for empathy. And with our online world becoming very negative at times, with our culture at times being cynical, and with our leadership being driven by the bottom line at companies, empathy is important, right? Across the board. It's no longer going to be just a nice to have, it will be a must have. And I interviewed Billy Ray, who's a screenwriter. He wrote a Hunger Games, was nominated for an Oscar. And he told me when he pitches into Hollywood, he needs to figure out what's in the other guy's shoes. The other guy on the table, the other gal on the table, what kind of shoes are they wearing? What do they want to hear? And I want you to have empathy for the other people you're talking to when you present your story. And more importantly, have empathy for yourself. Because we are so judgmental about our own stories. And we're so judgmental about how we present ourselves. I sometimes hate listening to my podcast. And I am a podcaster because I can't stand to hear my voice. So many of us don't like to watch ourselves talk because we say like or modifiers to not say what we want to say. So have empathy as you think about your badass stories. So these are the 3 badass stories that Grumpy Cat is going to help us to write now. So you watching at home or you here today, you all can hopefully take away value immediately. So number one of 3 things, create a mind map. Anyone here done a mind map before? A mind map is very good to visualize problems you have. And I recommend creating a visual representation of what you're trying to do and having branches and connected topics that remind you of your stories. So the central idea is what's important, being a badass. And I did this online. It's very easy. There's many mind mapping programs. I also do them by hand. And I wanted to not edit this professionally because this is how raw our stories are. And many of us don't think we have great stories. You could be watching this on YouTube and think, I'm only 18. I don't have any stories yet. And that's where the undervalued stories come into play. So this is, like I mentioned, I sometimes call the tearjerker story, now the underdog. And so this is where I went through to figure out how to map my story. And I had a client who was based out of Minnesota, and he did this mind map when he quit a pre-ROTC program, and he had lived with shame in his life. And he told me figuring out how to story edit what happened allowed him to present his failure with confidence. And so when I went through with my underdog, I was laid off. You see that point? I mentioned that story. I talked about how I had shame with my wife. I talked about how I cried in my car. I went to drink margaritas, but I found a better job. Right? So I'm bringing this together in a way to help you understand that having empathy for yourself allows you to understand that many of these negatives can be positives. You talked about I was promoted and demoted at Machinima, which is another whole other story. Over beers, we can talk about it. My stand-up comedy career, I was a film career lackey. I was a PA. I found like an existential crisis guy, right? I've done film, I've done comedy, and now I do marketing. But ultimately, I was depressed in my 20s. And then here's another mind map that if you want to really make it more structured, I recommend mind mapping your stories. So if you have a sales pitch and you have 5 stories and you want to figure out which ones help, this is a great organizational tool. This is my badass story. And I talk about I'm a public speaker. I think that's an accomplishment. I ran marketing at Machinima, and I talk about all the things I did there. I performed stand-up comedy 50 times. And again, using myself as the guinea pig here, this is how you figure out what to tell people. And it's a framework that makes you understand the elements of your story. Because you're gonna lose focus sometimes you're telling your story, and you may not remember. So I can look at this mind map right now before I give a talk and understand the points I need to hit. So the second point, develop 5 headlines. Think of yourself as a blogger, a YouTuber, someone creating content. What are your headlines? Talk about, in those headlines, how you displayed an expertise in your field, because you're a badass. Something you can teach others to help grow your influence and help them grow theirs, to make an emotional connection. And then, more important, you want to collab with people to create word of mouth. So they can remember 3 things, or at the very least, 1 thing. If you can't walk out of here today, I failed, if you can't remember 1 thing. Hopefully you remember 3 badass stories. And if you didn't, then I need to go back to the drawing board. So let's just all assume you're remembering all of this stuff. And so then you write your headlines, you practice them. And you take your friends, talk to your family, your colleagues. Think about creating a trust group. I always recommend having accountability friends. If you work at a company that's small, you're an entrepreneur. And find the headlines that are really compelling. Go bold, go big, and mash them up if they don't work. And so these are my badass headlines. I performed stand-up comedy 500 times, including the improv. I overcame clinical depression in my 20s. And if you notice, I mashed those 2 headlines up because on their own, those stories aren't compelling. And I don't tell that story to everyone because not everyone I meet for 20 minutes needs to know that I struggled through depression. There's stigmas to it. Laid off by Disney, cried in my car, got a better job in 2 weeks, launched a podcast, wrote my book, right? So I don't want to just get into like all these moments because true badasses don't talk about how badass they are, right? But that's where you need to go with this and think about the stories framing you in a way that you're showing people. You're not telling people. That's when great scripts are written in Hollywood that show rather than tell. And if you create a metaphor or a visual representation or an example that resonates, even acronyms work. I imagine at Google you have many, many acronyms to help people remember. So my final badass headline. After a corporate layoff, I joined Machinima.com. Our team launched the video game Minecraft before its $2.5 billion exit. If I talk to anyone in the world, they've heard of Minecraft. My book's coming out in Korean later this year, and everyone there loves Minecraft. So that resonates. And I don't tell you, I was not the founder of the company. I ran the marketing campaign. So most of us understand that we do really awesome things. We truly do badass things, memorable things. And you can be a smaller piece of a larger pie. And that's where I found most people undervalue their stories. They don't want to take credit. They have some sort of imposter syndrome where they don't feel like they, like, how many of you feel like you don't belong telling stories because you're not the one that did all the work? And so that's where the undervalue happens. And you can take something small that you did that was memorable and impactful and had influence and share that with others. And don't be afraid to be a badass. And then finally, the third thing. So we can mind map our ideas. We write 5 headlines is the second element of this. The third thing is write 20 minutes each, right? There's a study out of UT Austin that when something's bothering you, if you write 20 minutes of free thought about it and don't even look at it again, it will ease your mind. How many of you use like voice text recognition? You're driving in the car to remember something, and it makes you feel better because you're not going to forget it, even though you forgot that you recorded it, right? That happens to me all the time. And you know, if you don't feel comfortable writing speech to text, create a video of yourself, and think about how to transcribe it. Even if you want to package it together, write a blog post about it, hire an editor. Because a lot of us don't have empathy for our own stories, and we may be self-conscious. But getting that feedback from other people could be helpful. And as we close up here, I want to harken back to my comedy days. This is the Improv in Washington, D.C., where I performed. And I got some great advice from a lot of different comedians, including Mitch Hedberg, who, if you're on YouTube right now, you should watch his videos. He's hilarious. And his advice to me was always finish your set. And never let the audience get in the way of finishing your jokes. So when you tell your stories, have a set order. Don't freestyle. The best stand-up comedians that do crowd work and they make fun of people in the crowd have scripted that most likely. And they've practiced it at open mic nights. And they go do open mics before they headline the Improv. And think about every comedian, if you notice they have a beer or a glass of water and a little note card on stage, or they use a coaster, and they have their set list because they want to remember the order. And I recommend not freestyling your jokes. I'm sorry, not freestyling your stories. Because great comedians don't freestyle. Don't improvise. I want to go see Seinfeld, Chris Rock, whomever, Chris Tucker, and hear their best jokes. I don't want to hear their new jokes that aren't funny, that aren't well rehearsed. So people want to hear great stories. And don't be afraid or ashamed or feel vulnerable if you tell the same story again and again. And ultimately, think about comedians and how well rehearsed they are. And in sales especially, you all know that. You got to have it down, the same pitch over and over again. So coming back full circle to my corporate guy turns layoff into career reinvention. We're all reinventing ourselves right now. If we haven't been laid off now, we know friends that have. If we haven't been fired yet, we know friends that have. That was really morbid. I said yet. None of you will get fired. It's an easy world out here. You're all millennials. Generation Z, don't worry. It's not hard. But when I was laid off in the parking lot, right, I'm crying. Tears are, but I'm like quietly crying, right, because I don't want anyone to see me. I have my box of belongings. I'm nervous to call my wife because I'm ashamed of this failure. And then, like I said, I felt like a badass because I got a severance and a better job and a raise. And I wouldn't be on the stage if I didn't get laid off. So when you tell that story as a badass, don't be afraid to own those low moments. I got great advice from a friend when I was hesitant to talk about depression. I still am because it's stigmatized. And I only talked about it once in front of an audience because my friend said, you went through that moment, right? You're not trying to exploit this. You're owning how you felt. So when you have those negative failures, the moments where you don't succeed, we all turn those into wins because we're all here. We're all in the room. I'm on stage. You're in the crowd. You're watching it online. So think about that as you leave today when you write your 3 badass stories and you have your framework for 3 ways to write those badass stories. Because all of us are underdogs. We're all badass authorities. And ultimately, all of us are fixers. And we help people solve problems. Thank you so much for having me today at Google.
Thank you, Ryan. And we do have a few minutes for questions, if we have any questions from the group.
Yeah. You're my favorite audience member, by the way. Like, you're overwhelming me.
So if you have an idea and you've been festering with this idea for a period of time, what is like the pivotal starting point, other than like writing it down and talking to close, trusted individuals about it?
Collaborators.
It's the finding somebody who's willing to jump in the boat with you,
The
basically.
collaborators, yeah. And realize not everyone's gonna want to jump in the boat, but you're gonna have to find the collaborators that opt in to wanting to hear more. And if you're a lone wolf by yourself and working alone, you have to figure out the right people to trust to talk about your problems with, and that's most likely not gonna be your significant other, spouse, or boyfriend if they don't work in the same industry. And so going to meetups and sizing people up, right? We live in LA where everyone's looking for a quick deal. It's really hard to sort through the noise. You go to a networking event and everyone's just a random jabroni, and you have to fight through that to find people that are real. And so I always recommend, like, if you have a story or an idea and you use a mind map and then you write headlines about it, and then you have a story to tell people, hone that story and really talk to the right people. And getting back to one of the inspirations for the book is, influencers. Like if you have a startup, and I interviewed Brad Feld for the book, who started Techstars, and he invested in Fitbit early, and he's doing obviously very well for himself, a big mentor, and he has a lot of pull. So why would you go to him first? He's an influencer. He's a one percenter. So you want to find those 10%er collaborators, and realize you may have to sift people. And you can't treat it like speed dating. This isn't Tinder. You're not looking for a fast opportunity. You're looking for see how I thought about that before what I said? You want to think about a longer term. So I also think like making a bigger vision, a 3-year vision. Where do you want to go? Who do you want to collaborate with? How do you get there? And I'll tell a quick story. So I met this guy, Nir Ale, through my podcast. He wrote a really good book called Hooked: How to Build Habit-Forming Products, which after you read The Influencer Economy and Give and Take and Hooked, with our book club that we're forming, again, Ryan at influencereconomy.com, will make this global. His book, Hooked, I wanted to have him on my podcast. I sent him a cold email, right? Had a great headline. I spent some time crafting it. I met him. We talked. I ended up doing the infamous airport ride. If anyone offers you, hey, I'm really busy, can you pick me up from the airport? Do it. There's so many stories in Silicon Valley where someone met someone through an airport ride. So I went, picked him up from the airport, collaborated on my podcast. He spoke in my Prius in front of a co-working space in Santa Monica, very LA, and made great content. And then he went to speak in front of 300 people, and with his book behind him. He then wrote a book blurb for me. We've collaborated on other projects, and it was all through a cold email, right? But I didn't go to Nir for guest number 1 or book blurber number 1. Or book subject expert number 1. I built my base. I had 25 podcast episodes. I've been doing it for a year. I also was an early adopter, so I did podcasting before it really became mainstream. And so think about that, like your strategy. So many great ideas fail because they have the wrong collaborators. And it's really your integral launch opportunities come through that team of people to collab with. Thank you. That's a great question. Do you have a question? No? You have a question? No.
All right, well, thanks.
Yeah.
Ryan.
Thank you so much.